need a little room. Okay. Before I begin, I actually want to just mention, in the spirit of speaking B'Shem Omra, when we teach in the spirit of someone who has taught us, I want to begin with gratitude to TBE's own Rabbi Emily Langowitz for the learning that inspired this sermon. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, she began with a choice. When the first inkling of light began to glimmer amidst the darkness and void and chaotic waters, God looked into the Torah, her book of wisdom, and considered, is this the world that was meant to be? Do I let this light continue? Do I nourish it and bring it into being and call it good? Or do I extinguish it? Our rabbis taught in a midrash that long before this world was brought into being, our world, whose creation is recounted in the first words of Torah in Parashat Breshit, there were hundreds, even thousands of worlds that came before, worlds begun and ended, because something in their creation was not good. And while we read in Genesis 1 of the creations that God deemed good, the light, the land and the seas, the trees and the stars that peek through their branches, bugs and birds, fins and fur, the first human beings created in the image of her, we don't hear about the worlds before, worlds which perhaps God tried hard to create, but which could not survive, or worlds that began to form before God was ready to care for them, worlds that caused her pain or threatened to diminish her divine light, worlds that were not good. Worlds began, worlds ended, by a creator with the power to consider and to choose when to create and when to cease creating. That power to consider and choose, to create and cut off, is granted to human beings as well. As we read on the sixth day of creation, God created humankind in the divine image, B'Tselem Elohim bara otam. That is, we who were created in the image of the Creator were created to be creators ourselves. And the first commandment that humankind was given is pru urvu, to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and take charge of its care, and all this God deems very good. So the proximity of these two principles, B'Tselem Elohim bara otam, that human beings are created in the image of the Creator, and pru urvu, that it is a mitzvah to be fruitful and multiply, is but one reminder of the sacredness of life in Jewish tradition. Each person is a reflection of God, a world unto themselves, and creating more of these reflections of God is a sacred form of human creativity. And as with everything in Torah, there are multiple sides to this story, multiple ways to accurately interpret these verses. In the ongoing national debate regarding abortion and the right to access reproductive care, there is a widespread assumption that religion speaks in a single voice, that Scripture unanimously privileges the sacredness of potential children over any other considerations. This assumption is false. Indeed, the multivalent voices of Jewish tradition, which uphold human life, even potential life, as precious, unanimously hold that preserving the life of a pregnant person, a living, breathing soul, takes precedence over the potential, not yet breathing life carried within them. While this does not mean that the potential life is not valued, it is not granted equal status to the person carrying it, even up until the moment of birth. As early as the book of Exodus, we find legal material that makes this distinction clear. And furthermore, there are various sources in our Talmud, voices which are 1,500 years old, which liken the fetus to water until it is about 40 days old. And beyond that, the rabbis liken it to its mother's thigh. That's like a limb of the body and not a separate entity. And so, in the painful cases in which a pregnancy threatens the life of the pregnant person, Jewish law is quite clear in support of abortion. Again, even up until the moment of birth. Now, interestingly, there are two paths which diverge from this point in the interpretive legal tradition. On one hand, Maimonides, the Rambam, permits abortion when a fetus is considered like a rodef, a pursuer, which is trying to kill its mother, in which case abortion is an act of justified self-defense. And this ruling becomes the basis for later strict halachic or Jewish legal interpretations, which tend to limit abortion to cases of immediate physical danger to a pregnant person. But another, more lenient strand follows the interpretation of the great commentator Rashi. And just as we learn in Genesis chapter 2 that the human being which God shaped from the earth did not become a nefesh chaya, a living soul, a living being, until God blew into its nostrils the nishmat chayim, the breath of life. Rashi lifts up the interpretation that a fetus is not considered a nefesh, a fully fledged, ensouled person, until it takes its first breath in the world. Therefore, it is possible to abort a fetus to save its mother. Now, while these two interpretations sound quite similar, because indeed the end point is just about the same, the different paths by which these two great legal minds arrive at these conclusions are significant, and they pave the way for another 1,000 years of legal interpretation to further define when pregnancy constitutes a threat to the life of the pregnant person. Later responsa, rabbinic rulings on specific legal situations, expand the permissibility of abortion to include cases in which the pregnancy not only threatens the physical safety of the mother, but very significantly, also the mental and emotional well-being of the pregnant person. These expansive understandings are affirmed by the Reform movement's positions on abortion as well, which add the thus far overlooked element that a pregnant individual is the one who should have the ultimate responsibility and authority to make this difficult moral decision informed by our traditions, and that this authority should not rest with the state or an external agency. And contemporary female halachic scholars contribute further important principles for us to consider. The theologian Rabbi Rachel Adler reminds us that women's voices were not included in the shaping of all of this halakha, which so deeply affects them. And even Blue Greenberg, a highly regarded Orthodox feminist scholar who is personally opposed to abortion, writes that many mitzvot are interdependent functions of timing and the conditions which they regulate. Therefore, when conditions do exist, such as the need to support the self or spouse through school, the need for time for a marriage to stabilize, overwhelming responsibilities to other children, and so forth, she says, abortion should be seen as a necessity rather than an evil. The voices of our tradition are able to hold multiple truths at once, both that potential life is precious and that our primary obligation is to care for those already living. Both of these sacred goals are achieved by ensuring universal access to safe, quality reproductive health care and support, both for those who want and have children, and for those for whom the time is not right, for whatever reason that might be. And Jewish people who are called to be pursuers of justice are reminded that that includes pursuing reproductive justice as well. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, she began with a choice. She looked into the Torah and considered, is this the world that was meant to be? And when God did bring this world into being, God created us to be creators, with the parallel power to choose when to create and when to cease creating. She placed us in the garden with a tree of knowledge of what is good and what is not. And the world's first woman looked and saw that the fruit of the tree was good, that it was a source of wisdom, and she weighed the consequences of the choice that she faced, and still she reached for the fruit. And in so doing, she gifted to all of her children yet to come the power to know, the power to discern, and the power to choose what is right and when it is good. This is our heritage. We are fruitful creators, whether or not we choose to multiply. May we hold fast to our sacred power to know and to choose, and may we work to ensure that this power is within the grasp of each and every one of Eve's children. Shabbat Shalom.